My name is Elena Cartwright. I'm 34, and I'm a lawyer. I've negotiated contracts worth millions without my voice shaking, stood in front of judges who could make grown men nervous. And I learned a long time ago how to keep my face calm even when everything inside me is screaming. 8 years after my wedding, I was sitting in my office going through depositions when my assistant buzzed me. She sounded weird, uncertain. She said there was someone in the lobby to see me. Catherine Marsh. I hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in almost a decade. Catherine Marsh is my mother. She has this way of standing that makes her look like a monument, like something permanent that expects to be maintained. When she walked into my office that Tuesday, she had her purse clutched in front of her like a shield. And before I could even say hello, before I could offer her a seat, she said, "Your father needs a kidney. You're the only match we have left." That was it. No, how have you been? No, I know it's been a while. Just, your father needs a kidney. 8 years of silence, and that's what she came to say. I didn't stand up. I stayed behind my desk and I looked at her. And I kept my voice as calm as I keep it in depositions. I said, "Is that what you're here for?" And 30 minutes later, we had a conversation that neither of us saw coming. Because the one word she'd said at my wedding, the word that broke everything, was about to cost her more than she ever thought she'd have to pay. That word was disowned. Welcome back to Revenge Camera Stories, where quiet people face loud cruelty. And the truth eventually comes out. If you like watching people realize they messed with the wrong person, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And hit subscribe if you want to see how this ends. Because trust me, my mother never saw this coming. Let me back up. Because the silence, it started 8 years and 3 days before that office visit, right after my wedding. It was a Saturday in September, one of those perfect fall days, where the light is golden, and the air smells like leaves, and everything feels like it's out of a movie. I got married at a vineyard. I was 26. I just made junior attorney at my firm. And I married a man named Marcus Cartwright, who makes documentary films and wears his grandfather's old watch, and treated my career like it mattered just as much as his. It should have been perfect. My mother spent the entire ceremony with her mouth in this thin line, you know the expression, the one that photographs badly and means worse. She didn't say a word during the vows. When people stood to toast us, she stayed seated. And when the reception finally ended and the last guests were leaving, she found me near the dessert table. I was holding a plate with cake on it I wasn't really eating. And she said, loud enough for Marcus's parents to hear, "You are no longer my daughter." 6 words. She said it clearly, like she'd been practicing, like she wanted to make sure I understood. And then she turned around and walked to her car. Her heels were loud on the gravel. My father was 3 feet behind her and he didn't say anything. My younger brother Jordan, he was 20 then, he just looked at the floor. And they left. I stood there in my wedding dress with frosting on a plate I couldn't eat. And Marcus put his hand on my shoulder, and I absorbed it. The way you absorb a flash going off in your face. Too bright to process right away. I didn't cry. I learned a long time ago that if you cry in public, people feel too uncomfortable to help you. So I just stood there. I wore this necklace that day, a little silver camera pendant that belonged to my grandmother. She was a journalist, and she used to say that the truth always shows up best when people forget the camera's watching. I found that pendant with my thumb and I held on to it, and I didn't say anything. Here's what you need to know about me to understand the rest of this. I grew up in Northern Virginia in a house where image was everything. My mother's family has old money, the kind that comes with plaques on hospital wings and charity, galas where everyone knows everyone's maiden name. My father is a vascular surgeon, Successful, serious, we lived in a neighborhood where even the landscaping had a pedigree. I was raised to be appropriate, to marry well, to understand that some choices reflect on the family and some choices reflect poorly. And a woman in our family always knew the difference. And I believed that. For a long time, I really believed it. It made me good in a courtroom. I learned how to read a room, how to stay composed, how to win without raising my voice. But it also made me a people pleaser. I performed. I tried to make everyone happy. And when I fell in love with someone my mother didn't approve of, I made a huge mistake. I thought love would be enough to change her mind. Marcus is black. That was my mother's problem. She never said it that clearly, of course. She wrapped it in other words. She talked about cultural differences. She asked questions about what kind of life we'd have. Like being happy wasn't enough. She acted worried, like difficulty was something to avoid instead of something to people work through together. When I brought him to family dinners, she'd introduce him by his job but never his name. She'd seat him at the far end of the table. And when I told her we were engaged, she went very still and said, "I see." That's all. Just "I see," in this voice that sounded like a door locking. But I pushed forward anyway. I thought if she just saw us together, really saw us, she'd come around. That's what happens in movies, right? The parents object, but then they see how happy their kid is. And they show up to the wedding and cry and everything gets tied up with a bow. My mother didn't come around. She showed up to the wedding, but only because not coming would have looked bad to the people she needed to impress. And when it was over, she made sure I understood. My choice had broken something she had no intention of fixing. "You are no longer my daughter." She said it the way other people return a library. Book clean, final, already decided. I left my own wedding reception with my husband and a car full of gifts. And this space in my chest that felt exactly the shape of the word disowned. If you've ever been erased by someone who was supposed to love you no matter what. If you've ever had to choose between your own life and someone else's approval, you know what that feels like. It feels like you're holding your breath underwater and nobody can tell. Comment truth if you know what I'm talking about. And keep watching, because I didn't stay underwater forever. I thought she'd call. Or send a card. Some kind of sign that the anger had cooled down. But nothing came. My father sent one stiff email on my birthday. He didn't mention the wedding or Marcus. Just happy birthday. Elena, that was it. Jordan called once. It was awkward. I could tell someone was listening. He said he wasn't allowed to visit. By year 2, I understood this wasn't temporary. This was intentional. My mother told her side of the family that I'd made my choice, and they should respect her. Boundaries, which in our family basically means pick a side and pick mine. Cousins I grew up with stopped answering my texts. My godmother, a woman who'd known me since I was a baby, sent my Christmas card back unopened. I got cropped out of family photos, literally. I saw one on Facebook once. They'd photoshopped me out. The story going around was simple and cruel. Elena was rebellious. Elena chose controversy over family. Elena broke her mother's heart and wouldn't apologize. My mother made sure every woman at her junior league lunches heard some version of it. I know because to people I used to work with mentioned it carefully. The way you mention someone's surgery. Scar when you don't want to be rude, but you know it's there. I didn't fight it because fighting would have meant I cared what they thought. And I decided early on that I wasn't going to give her that. Marcus and I built our own life. I made partner at my firm by 30. We bought a house with good light and a backyard. We were happy. Really happy. The kind of happy that doesn't need an audience. I told myself that was enough. But the silence, it followed me. Not literally, but in small ways. At the firm holiday party when everyone's parents came and I had to smile and say mine. Couldn't make it again the morning I argued my first appellate case and wanted to call someone who'd known me long enough to understand what that meant. The afternoon I miscarried at 11 weeks and sat in a hospital room with Marcus and a kind nurse, but no mother. I started to realize that being disowned isn't one big wound. It's 100 small ones. Little paper cuts that don't bleed enough to bandage but never quite stop stinging. By year 5, I stopped expecting anything. I didn't check my phone hoping to see her name. I didn't look at wedding announcements to see if Jordan got married without telling me. I made peace with it the way you make peace with a scar. You stop touching it to see if it still hurts. And then, year 8, she walked into my office. Stay with me, because this is where I started to understand something important. People who discard you don't come back because they've changed. They come back because they need something. And what they need is usually the only part of you they ever valued in the first place. My assistant Lauren buzzed me twice before I actually processed what she was saying. There's a Catherine Marsh here to see you. She says she's your mother. I'd never told Lauren I had a mother. Not in any way that mattered. Hearing it in present tense felt like whiplash. I almost told her to send my mother away. But then I thought about my grandmother, the one with the camera. She used to say the moments you want to avoid are usually the ones you need to pay attention to. I didn't have a camera that day, but I had something better. I had a law degree and 8 years of clarity. I told Lauren to send her in. My mother walked into my office and she looked the same, just smaller somehow. The way people shrink when you stop giving them power. She looked around at my diplomas on the wall, the view of the city, the nameplate that said Elena Cartwright, partner. She sat down across from my desk, set her purse in her lap, and she said, "Your father is in renal failure. He needs a transplant. You're O negative and so is he. Jordan is AB positive. I'm B positive. The donor list is years long and he doesn't have years." Just like that. No, I'm sorry. No, how have you been? Just a medical problem and the solution she decided I was going to provide. I looked at her, and I didn't feel the anger I'd expected. I felt something colder, clearer. She'd come because I was useful now. Not because 8 years had changed her mind. Not because she'd been wrong. But because my body had something her husband needed. And that made me worth acknowledging again. "Is that what you're here for?" I asked. My voice was calm, flat. She blinked. She'd expected tears, I think. Or immediate compliance. Or guilt. The kind of guilt daughters are supposed to feel when their father is dying. She got none of it. "He's your father, Elena. He stood behind you 8 years ago and said nothing. This is different. This is life and death." I leaned back in my chair. I felt the camera pendant cool against my skin under my blouse. "You told me I was no longer your daughter. I'm assuming that still applies." Her face did something complicated. Surprise, maybe panic. "You can't possibly." I held up one hand, the way I do in court when a witness is spiraling. "I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need time to think about it." "You don't get to be silent for 8 years and then walk in here and expect me to make a life-altering medical decision in the same conversation." She stood up, and for just a second, I saw real panic underneath the composure. "He doesn't have time for you to punish me, Elena. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm thinking. You can leave your contact information with my assistant." She stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. In her world, family obligations were immediate, unquestioned daughters. Didn't require time to think about saving their fathers. But I wasn't her daughter. She'd made that very clear. She left the door closed. and I sat at my desk with my hands flat on the surface, breathing carefully. The way you breathe after a cross-examination. You weren't sure you'd survive. That night, I told Marcus everything. We sat at the kitchen table with tea going cold between us. And I repeated the whole conversation word for word. He listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he asked the only question that mattered. What do you want to do? I didn't know yet. But I knew I wasn't going to do it her way. If watching a woman who's decided she's, then being useful to people who threw her away is your thing. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Tell me in the comments where you would have stopped. Because I almost gave in twice, but then I remembered what my grandmother used to say. Let things play out long enough, and people always show you who they really are. Not someone from my firm. This needed to be separate. Her name was Diane Okoro, and she specialized in medical ethics and family law, which turned out to be exactly the intersection I was standing in. I told her everything. The disownment, the 8 years, the office visit, the demand. She didn't take notes, which lawyers almost always do. She just listened. And when I finished, she sat back and said, "What you're describing is coercion dressed up as family duty." Something in my chest loosened. I'd been afraid I was overreacting, that I was being petty or cold. Hearing her name, coercion made it real. Here's what you need to understand, Diane said. Organ donation is voluntary. Legally, morally, ethically, it's your choice. Yours alone. No one can force you. Not even a parent. If you want to do this, fine. If you don't, that's equally valid. But if you're even considering it, we need to set terms. What do you mean? Right now, your mother thinks she can show up, make a demand, and you'll comply because that's how it's always worked. If you're going to move forward, you rewrite the script. You set conditions. You document everything. And you make sure that whatever happens, it's on your terms, not hers. I sat with that for a long time. The idea that I could say yes without surrendering everything felt revolutionary. We drafted a letter together, formal, clinical, very clear. I would undergo preliminary testing to see if I was a viable match. If I was, I would consider donation, but only under these conditions. A full written acknowledgement. From my mother of what? She said at my wedding and the 8 years of estrangement that followed. A private meeting with my father to hear from him directly what he wanted. No contact with extended family until after any medical decisions were made. All communication through legal representatives. It was the kind of letter you write when you've been burned enough times to know you need a paper trail. Diane sent it certified mail. We waited. The response came 4 days later from my father's attorney, not my mother. That told me two things. She was taking this seriously, and she was already trying to control the narrative. The letter was stiff and legal, but it agreed to the terms. My mother would provide the written statement. My father wanted to see me. Testing could proceed. I read it twice, standing in my kitchen with Marcus reading over my shoulder. I felt that same thing I'd felt when my mother left my office. Not triumph, just a strange, sad clarity. They'd agreed because they had no choice, not because anything had changed. And that was important to know. People ask me if I was angry. The truth is, I wasn't. Anger is hot, reactive. What I felt was cooler and more permanent. I felt like I was finally setting down a bag I'd been carrying since. I was 26, the one labeled good daughter, and I was looking at everything that had been inside it. Most of it had never been mine to begin with. The written acknowledgement arrived by courier. It was the most Catherine Marsh thing I'd ever read. 3 paragraphs, typed and signed, admitting that yes, she had told me I was no longer her daughter. Yes, we hadn't spoken in 8 years. and that she regretted any pain this estrangement may have caused. It was phrased like a corporate apology. Passive voice. Emotionally empty. It didn't admit fault so much as acknowledge that fault had occurred somewhere in the general area. I read it standing in my office, and I thought about all the times I'd imagined her apologizing over the years. In my head, she always cried. She said she'd been wrong. She said she was proud of me. This letter said none of that. But it was on paper. It was signed. And it was more than I ever thought I'd get. I filed it. The meeting with my father was scheduled at a neutral location, a conference room at his attorney's office. I hadn't seen him in 8 years. When I walked in, he looked older, grayer, smaller, the way sick people do when their bodies start losing. He stood when I entered, awkward, formal, and I realized we'd never figured out how to talk to each other without my mother writing the script. We sat. His attorney excused himself. My father looked at me and said, "You look well." "Thank you." Silence. "Your mother said you made partner." "I did." More silence. I wasn't going to make this easy. If he wanted something from me, he was going to have to ask for it himself, not send my mother to collect it like a bill he forgot to pay. He cleared his throat. "I don't have much time. Elena, the doctors have been clear. And I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything." It was the closest I'd ever heard him come to an apology. "But I'm asking anyway," he said. "Not because I deserve it. I stood there and let your mother say what she said. And I didn't fight for you. And I've thought about that every day since. But I'm asking because I'm your father. And I don't want to die. And you're the only option I have left." His voice cracked. I watched him cry. This man who spent my entire childhood telling me emotions were for people, without discipline. And I felt everything at once: pity, anger, grief for a relationship we never had. And underneath it all, a question I'd been avoiding. Did I want him to live? The answer surprised me. Yes, I did. Not because he'd earned it. Not because 8 years could be erased with one conversation. But because I'm not my mother. I don't throw people away when they stop being convenient. And if I had the ability to save his life, I wasn't sure I could live with myself if I didn't try. But I wasn't going to let him off easy. "If I do this," I said quietly, "it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't mean we're okay. It means I'm doing something good for someone who needs it. And that person happens to be you." He nodded, wiped his face with a handkerchief that looked like it had belonged to someone's grandfather. "If I do this," I continued, "I need you to tell me something." He looked up. "I need you to tell me why you didn't stop her. At the wedding. In the 8 years after. I need to understand what I was up against." He looked at me for a long time, weighing how much truth he could afford. Then he said, "Because I was afraid of her. 3 decades of marriage. And the surgeon who made life and death decisions. Every day had been too afraid of his own wife to defend his daughter. She has a way of making you feel like the world will. And if you don't do what she wants," he said, "it's easier to go along than to fight." I'm not proud of it. But that's the truth. I sat with that. It didn't excuse him, but it explained him. And in a weird way, it freed me. I'd spent years wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have said differently to make them choose me. But the truth was simpler and sadder. They didn't choose me because choosing me would have required choosing themselves first. And neither of them had the spine for it.